This is completely unacceptable. You deliberately shut off the water, and Silver Ridge Estates will not stand for it.
This is completely unacceptable. He was explicitly told not to touch the main valve. We have rules for a reason, Deputy.
As president of the association, this clearly shows the boundary line.
This doesn't have a county stamp, ma'am.
Or a signature. As you can see by the deed, this fence line hasn't moved in 50 years. That camera is pointed directly at my home.
Close that immediately. You are in direct violation of the covenants. We won't stand for this.
We need to see the recorded easement, supporting documents. Otherwise, this valve has to be closed.
The first time an HOA president called 911 on me, I was standing beside a rusted steel water valve on my own ranch, with dust on my boots, a padlock in my hand, and half a dozen angry suburban homeowners screaming at me like I had just poisoned the town reservoir. I had not touched a public utility. I had not crossed anyone's property line. I had not damaged a single pipe that belonged to anyone else. All I had done was turn off my own water, and that was enough for Marlene Price, the woman everyone in the new subdivision called Madam President when she was in the room, and Karen with a clipboard when she wasn't, to point her manicured finger at my chest and shout, "You are going to jail for this." Behind her, the sprinklers in Silver Ridge Estates were dying one by one. First, the entrance monument stopped misting the flower beds. Then the bright green grass along their private road started losing pressure. Then the decorative fountain in the middle of their little roundabout made one choking sound and went silent. Marlene looked at that fountain like I had shot it. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. I remember the exact words she used because my barn camera caught all of it. "There is a man out here tampering with our water supply," she said, loud enough for every neighbor to hear. "He shut off water to an entire community. We need deputies here now. He is threatening public safety." I almost laughed, but I didn't. Because when someone lies to emergency dispatch while standing on your land, beside your private well line, with illegal pipe fittings buried under your fence, laughter is the one thing you cannot afford. So I stayed quiet. I leaned against the gatepost, folded my arms, and waited. Marlene kept pacing in the dust, telling the gathering crowd that I was a hostile ranch owner, that people like me hated progress, that my little farm fantasy did not give me the right to interfere with HOA infrastructure. The funny thing was, the valve she wanted me arrested for closing had been installed by my father 15 years earlier. The well behind it was permitted in my name. The pump was wired to my meter. The pipe ran under my soil. And Silver Ridge Estates had no recorded easement, no utility agreement, no permit, and no legal right to take a single gallon from it. But Marlene did not know that yet. Or maybe she did. That was the part the county inspector would later care about most. When the sheriff's cruiser finally rolled through the ranch gate, Marlene walked straight toward it, like she had ordered room service. She pointed at me, before the deputy even shut his door. "That's him," she said. "He shut off our community water. I want him arrested." The deputy looked at me, then at the locked valve, then at the fence line, where fresh dirt still showed in a crooked scar across my pasture. He asked one simple question. "Ma'am, do you have paperwork showing this HOA has water rights through this property?" Marlene smiled like she had been waiting for that moment. She reached into her folder and pulled out a faded photocopy from the old developer, a page with no county stamp, no recording number, no signatures from me, and a handwritten note in the margin that said, "Temporary access to ranch source." She held it up like it was the Constitution. The deputy read it once. Then he read it again. Then he looked back at me and asked, "Sir, do you have your deed and well permit?" I said, "Yes, deputy. And I have video of their contractor digging across my property at 5 in the morning." That was the first time Marlene stopped talking. Not for long. But long enough for everyone standing there to hear the wind move through the dry grass. And long enough for me to realize this was no longer just about water. This was about a board that thought a ranch outside their HOA was something they could absorb, pressure, and use until I finally gave up. They had picked the wrong valve. They had picked the wrong property line. And by the time the county finished reading the records, that 911 call would cost them a contractor, an insurance claim, a public meeting, thousands of dollars, and the presidency Marlene loved more than the neighborhood itself. I never bought that ranch to make a statement. I bought it because I was tired. Tired of noise. Tired of people measuring the worth of a life by how clean your driveway looked. Tired of neighbors who waved at you with one hand and reported you with the other. I had spent most of my adult life doing everything the proper way, signing the forms, paying the bills, keeping my head down. By the time I found those 42 acres outside Marlow County, all I wanted was a place where the mornings were quiet and nobody cared if my truck had dust on it. The ranch was not impressive in the way real estate agents use that word. There was no stone entrance, no electronic gate, no pool, no outdoor kitchen, no fake waterfall glowing blue at night. It was a plain piece of dry country with a little one-story house, an old red barn, a workshop that smelled like motor oil and cedar, 2 horse pens, a gravel drive, and a line of mesquite trees that had probably survived worse people than Marlene Price. But to me, it was perfect. My father helped me close on it. He was already sick then, though he pretended not to be. He walked the fence line with me in boots he could barely bend down to tie, pointing out the corners, the old survey pins, the low spots where water would collect after a storm. He kept saying, "Land only stays yours if you know where it starts and where it stops." At the time, I thought he was just being old-fashioned. Later, I understood he was warning me. The well sat behind the barn, about 60 yards from the house. Under a faded metal roof, my father and I patched together, one Saturday afternoon, with more sweat than skill. It was not some commercial water system. It was a private ranch well, permitted through the county, connected to my meter, maintained with my money, and used for my house, my garden, my livestock, and the fire tank I kept, because summer grass out there could turn into a fuse. That well mattered. When my father passed, I kept hearing his voice every time the pump kicked on. When the first foal was born in the east pen, that water washed mud off my hands. When a hard freeze split a line near the trough, I was out there at midnight with a flashlight and pipe tape, cursing and laughing because that was ranch life. Nothing was convenient, but everything was mine. For years, the land east of me was just open scrub. Then the developer came. At first, it was survey stakes and orange flags. Then came the bulldozers, the dust clouds, the sales banners, and the smiling signs promising luxury country living minutes from town. They called it Silver Ridge Estates, which was funny, because there was no ridge and nothing silver, except the temporary construction trailers baking in the sun. I did not fight the subdivision. That land was not mine. People had a right to buy homes. Families had a right to move in. I even waved at the first few owners when they drove by slowly, looking at my barn like it was either charming or contagious. But Silver Ridge came with an HOA, and the HOA came with rules, and the rules came with people who seemed offended that I existed just outside their reach. The first letter arrived 3 months after the entrance monument went up. It said my fence was not in compliance with community aesthetic standards. I thought it was a mistake, so I called the number at the bottom. A young man answered, asked for my lot number, and sounded confused when I told him I did not have one, because I was not part of Silver Ridge Estates. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. This one said my gravel drive created visual disharmony with the paved roads inside the community. After that, came a notice about my barn color, then one about my livestock trailer, then one about excessive native brush along the shared boundary. There was no shared boundary in the way they meant it. There was their property line, and there was mine. I put every letter in a folder, not because I planned to sue anyone, but because my father had also taught me that paper has a longer memory than people. When I finally met Marlene Price, she was standing at my front gate, wearing white pants in a dust storm, and holding a clipboard like it was a badge. She introduced herself as the HOA president and told me the board wanted to build a cooperative relationship. That sounded harmless until she explained what cooperative meant. They wanted me to repaint my barn a neutral color. They wanted me to screen my equipment from view. They wanted me to stop parking my old flatbed near the fence. And then, with the same casual tone someone might use to ask for a cup of sugar, she said, Silver Ridge expected me to participate in shared infrastructure obligations, because my ranch was functionally connected to the development area. I told her, politely, that my ranch was not functionally connected to anything. I was outside their plat, outside their covenants, outside their assessment district. I had not signed their documents, used their roads, voted for their board, or received their services. Marlene smiled at me like I was a child refusing medicine. Communities evolve, she said. People who refuse to adapt usually discover the county doesn't enjoy holdouts. That was the first time I realized she was not asking. She was positioning. After that, the pressure became background noise. Emails, certified letters, complaints, little comments from new homeowners about how my place made the entrance road look unfinished. One man in a golf cart told me the board was discussing whether my ranch could be annexed into the association someday. I told him to enjoy his golf cart and stay on his side of the fence. I tried not to let it get under my skin. Most days, I succeeded. I had chores, animals, equipment, repairs, feed deliveries, and a life that did not revolve around Marlene Price's opinion of my fence. But I would be lying if I said it did not wear on me. There is a special kind of exhaustion that comes from defending something you already own, from people who act like ownership is a negotiation. And if you have ever had an HOA, a neighbor, or a developer try to tell you what you can do on land they do not pay taxes on, you already know the feeling. Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the only thing that keeps people from feeling crazy is hearing that someone else has been through the same thing. For almost a year, I thought the worst they could do was send letters. Then July came. Hot, dry, ugly July. The kind of heat that makes metal gates burn your palm and turns the horizon white by noon. My horses drank more. My garden struggled. The pump ran longer than usual. But at first I blamed the weather. Then my electric bill jumped. Not a little. Enough that I stood in my kitchen staring at the number, wondering if the power company had made a mistake. A few days later, I noticed the fire tank behind the barn was not filling the way it should. Then the trough in the east pen dropped overnight. Then I walked the fence line after breakfast and saw something that made every letter, every threat, and every fake smile conversation with Marlene feel different. The ground near the east boundary was damp, not muddy from rain, not wet from runoff, damp in a narrow, crooked line that ran from my well trench straight toward Silver Ridge Estates. We had not had rain in 26 days. I stood there for a long time, listening to my pump hum behind me and the distant hiss of sprinklers on the other side of the fence. That was when I understood the HOA had stopped trying to control how my ranch looked. They had found a way to take from it. I did not touch the damp ground at first. When you live on land long enough, you learn not to disturb the first piece of evidence you find. A wet line in dry soil is not just wet dirt. It is a sentence someone wrote across your property without permission. Behind me, my well pump kicked on again with that low vibration I knew by heart. Usually, that sound comforted me. That morning, it sounded strained, like it was working for someone I had never met. On the other side of the fence, Silver Ridge Estates looked perfect. Smooth blacktop, identical mailboxes, fresh sod, flower beds, and sprinklers ticking in clean little arcs along the entrance road. Their grass was shining in the heat. My pasture was the color of old cardboard. I followed the damp line slowly. It started near the trench, where my main water line ran from the well house toward the fire tank. Then it curved east toward the fence in a path too straight to be natural and too recent to be old irrigation. The soil had been dug up and pressed back down. Whoever did it had tried to hide it, but ranch dirt tells on people. Small rocks that should have been buried were sitting on top. The grass roots had been cut clean. About 12 feet from the fence, I saw the corner of a green plastic lid. I knelt down, brushed away loose dirt, and uncovered a small irrigation valve box that had not been there a week earlier. My stomach went cold before I even opened it. Inside was a fresh PVC connection, white pipe, new fittings, purple primer stains, a shutoff handle, a pressure regulator. Everything was tied into the line that came from my private well. The pipe disappeared under the fence. I did not say anything. I took out my phone and started recording. I filmed the valve box, the fresh glue marks, the disturbed trench, the distance to my well house, the fence line, the damp soil, and the spray from the HOA sprinklers beyond it. Then I called Luis, the only plumber in the county I trusted. He arrived an hour later in a faded blue truck and stared into the valve box for a long time. "Somebody tapped you," he said. I asked if it could be old. He shook his head. "This is new pipe, new glue, maybe a week, maybe less." I asked if there was any legitimate reason an HOA line would be connected there. "Only if you signed something. They pulled a permit, and somebody inspected the backflow protection," he said. And even then, I'd expect a meter and paperwork. This looks like somebody wanted water without a bill. Water without a bill. I paid for the pump electricity. I paid for the maintenance. I paid when the pressure tank failed. I paid for repairs, county fees, insurance, and every inch of that system. And somehow, on the other side of my fence, people were watering decorative grass like my ranch was their private reservoir. Luis told me to call the county and a lawyer. I told him I would. But first, I wanted to see who came running when the water stopped. He looked at me carefully. You're going to shut it off? I'm going to shut off my valve on my land. He nodded. Then record everything. I waited until late afternoon, when the Silver Ridge sprinklers came on again. The entrance beds sprayed first, then the strip along the private road, then the fountain median. The system was drawing hard enough that my pump cycled over and over. My fire tank was filling slower than it should have. The east trough had dropped low enough that one of my horses stood over it, nudging the float with her nose. That was when the anger finally settled in. Not loud anger, quiet anger, the kind that makes every detail sharp. I walked to the well house, opened the metal door, and stood in front of the manifold my father had labeled years before. House, barn, fire tank, east pasture, main line. I put my hand on the shutoff controlling the branch that ran toward the east side of my property. Then I turned the valve. The pipe gave a small shudder. The pump changed tone. For the first time in days, it rested. I locked the well house, started recording again, and waited. It took 20 minutes. A white SUV came flying down the Silver Ridge entrance road and stopped near the fence. Marlene Price got out wearing sunglasses, white pants, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no by anyone who mattered to her. Grant Keller, an HOA board member, followed her. Behind him was a younger man in a Silver Ridge polo shirt, the maintenance coordinator. Marlene did not greet me. She pointed across the fence. What did you do? I stayed on my side. I turned off my water. That water services community landscaping and emergency infrastructure. No, that water services my ranch. Grant stepped forward. We have an agreement. Show it to me. Marlene lifted her chin. The developer established access before turnover. The board inherited those arrangements. Recorded easement? I asked. She said nothing. Permit? Grant looked away. Meter? No one answered. I pointed to the valve box at my feet. Who installed this? Marlene glanced down at it, like she had never seen it before, but her face tightened too quickly. That is association infrastructure, she said. It is on my property. It supports the community. It is on my property. Then she said, the line I would never forget. You people out here always think property lines make you special. That was when I knew this was not just arrogance. She was not denying the property line. She was dismissing it. If you don't restore the water, she said, we will have you fined, sued, and removed from this property if necessary. Removed from my ranch? You are interfering with a utility. This is not a utility. It is now. I kept my phone visible and said nothing. That made her angrier. People like Marlene can use yelling. They can turn it into proof that you are unstable. What they cannot stand is calm documentation. By sunset, more residents had gathered near the entrance road. They had not seen the pipe. They had not seen the valve box. They had only heard Marlene's version. One woman shouted that her HOA dues paid for those common areas. A man asked if I was one of those anti-government ranch people. Someone else yelled that if the subdivision lost fire protection, I would be responsible. I said once, loud enough for everyone to hear, this well is private. This line is on my land. I have not touched your homes, your meters, or any public water system. Marlene raised her voice over mine. He is cutting off community water because he hates the HOA. Then the fountain at the Silver Ridge roundabout stopped. The pump hidden inside it made a dry grinding noise, spat once, and went quiet. Every resident turned and looked. Marlene's face went red. She pulled out her phone. Last chance, she said. I did not move. She dialed 911. While she talked to dispatch, she repeated the words she wanted witnesses to remember. Public safety, water tampering, community infrastructure, unstable property owner. I kept recording. The whole time, the illegal valve box sat open in the dirt between us. When Marlene hung up, she smiled at me. That was very stupid, she said. Deputies don't like people who mess with utilities. I looked at the fresh trench line, the dying sprinklers, and the subdivision that had been built close enough to covet my land, but not careful enough to respect it. Then I said, good, then they can look at the pipe. Marlene laughed like I had missed the point, but across the pasture, High in a mesquite tree near the fence, my trail camera had already captured what she did not know existed. 2 mornings earlier, at 5:08 a.m., a white contractor truck had pulled up without headlights. 2 men had climbed my fence. One carried a shovel, the other carried PVC pipe, and before the sun came up, they had dug straight toward my well line. The deputy arrived expecting a loud property dispute. That was obvious from the way he stepped out of his cruiser, one hand resting near his belt, eyes moving between Marlene, the residents, and me, like he was trying to figure out who was going to start shouting first. Marlene did not disappoint him. She walked straight up to the cruiser before he had even closed the door. "Deputy, thank God you're here," she said. "This man has shut down water to our community. He is tampering with infrastructure and creating a public safety issue." I stayed by my gate, not because I was scared of her, but because I knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to rush forward. She wanted me to interrupt. She wanted me angry enough to look guilty. So I waited. The deputy looked past her at me. "Sir, did you shut off a water line?" "Yes, deputy," I said. "A private line on my own property." Marlene spun around. "That is not private. It serves Silver Ridge Estates." The deputy held up one hand. That one hand did more to quiet her than anything I had said all afternoon. He walked over to the open valve box, crouched down, and looked at the pipe. Then he looked at the fence, the fresh dirt, and the well house behind me. "Who installed this?" he asked. Marlene answered, before anyone else could. "Our association has long-standing infrastructure access established through the developer," the deputy asked. "Do you have documents showing that?" She pulled the faded photocopy from her folder. I could see the confidence come back into her face as she handed it over. To her, paperwork was not about truth. It was about performance. If something looked official enough, she expected people to obey it. The deputy read the page. Then he read it again. There was no county stamp, no recording number, no notarized signature from any ranch owner, no legal description granting water rights, just a developer letterhead and vague language about temporary access. He turned to me. "Do you have paperwork for the well?" "Yes, sir," I said. "In the house. I also have the deed, the survey from my closing, electric records for the pump, and video of a contractor crossing my fence before sunrise." That last part changed his face. Marlene heard it too. For the first time since she arrived, she stopped talking. The deputy told everyone to stay where they were while he took a report. He did not arrest me. He did not order me to reopen the valve. He did not treat Marlene's photocopy like a court order. That made her furious. But it gave me exactly what I needed. A case number. The next morning, I stopped thinking like a tired ranch owner and started thinking like someone building a file. I made a folder on my computer labeled Silver Ridge Waterline. Inside it, I made subfolders for photos, video, emails, county records, invoices, maps, and witness notes. I copied every clip from the barn camera. I saved the trail camera footage twice, once to an external drive and once to cloud storage. I took still frames showing the contractor truck, the men climbing my fence, the PVC pipe, and the timestamp in the bottom corner. Then I walked the whole route again in daylight. I photographed the disturbed soil with a tape measure beside it. I photographed the valve box from every angle. I photographed my well permit tag, the pump control panel, the manifold labels, the fire tank level, the east pasture trough, and the Silver Ridge sprinklers running on the other side of the fence before the shutdown. I took pictures like I expected someone to lie about every inch, because they already had. After that, I pulled out every document I owned on the ranch. The deed was first, then the title policy, then the survey from when I bought the property, then the well permit issued through the County Water Resources Office, then repair receipts from Luis, electrical bills, pump service records, and the original notes my father had written on the manifold layout. None of it mentioned Silver Ridge. None of it mentioned shared water. None of it gave the HOA anything. I called the county clerk and asked for every recorded easement touching my parcel. The woman on the phone sounded bored until I mentioned an HOA water line. Then she paused. "On a private ranch well?" she asked. "That's what it looks like. You'll want the plat records and the development file too." That was the first useful sentence anyone outside my fence had given me. I ordered everything. Then I called a licensed surveyor named Ellen Pierce, who had done boundary work in that county for 30 years and had the kind of voice that made nonsense feel embarrassed to exist. She came out 2 days later with her equipment, walked the fence line, found the old pins, and started marking the boundary with bright flags. By the time she was done, the situation looked even worse. The valve box was on my side. The trench was on my side. The tap into the line was on my side. and part of the HOA's decorative landscaping had crept over the boundary by several feet, including 2 irrigation heads that had been spraying my soil while stealing my pressure. Ellen looked at Marlene's photocopy and gave a dry little laugh. "This is not an easement," she said. "This is a wish." I asked her to put that in more professional language. She did. Her preliminary letter stated that no visible evidence supported a recorded utility easement across my parcel, and that the newly installed water connection appeared to originate on my property without boundary authorization. I emailed that letter to the HOA. I kept my message short. I said I had discovered an unauthorized connection to my private ranch well. I said the connection was located on my property. I requested copies of any recorded easement, permit, utility agreement, board approval, contractor invoice, inspection record, or legal document they claimed gave them access. I told them the valve would remain closed until the issue was reviewed by the county and council. I did not insult Marlene. I did not threaten her. I did not write one emotional sentence. Marlene answered in 43 minutes. Her email was so arrogant that my attorney later called it a gift with a subject line. She wrote that the board had already determined the ranch well was part of shared infrastructure serving the broader Silver Ridge development area. She wrote that my refusal to cooperate was malicious. She wrote that if I did not restore water access immediately, the HOA would pursue fines, emergency damages, and all available remedies. She also wrote one sentence that mattered more than all the rest. The association has relied on that connection with full knowledge of its location. Full knowledge. I printed the email. Then I printed 3 extra copies. Next, I called a property attorney named Daniel Reeves. I expected him to tell me this would be expensive and slow, and he did. But after I sent him the photos, survey letter, well permit, Marlene's email, and the trail camera clips, his tone changed. "This is not just an HOA being annoying," he said. "If they connected to a private well without a recorded easement or permit, they may have created a utility, trespass, contamination, and liability problem all at once." He told me not to touch the pipe again. He told me not to argue with residents. He told me all communication should be in writing. Then he told me to contact County Water Resources, Code Enforcement, and the Sheriff's Office with the case number from the 911 call. That case number suddenly became more useful than Marlene ever intended. I sent formal complaints with attachments. Photos, videos, surveyor letter, well permit, deed, screenshots of Marlene's email. The faded developer photocopy the deputy had scanned into the incident report. I asked one simple question in every message. Who authorized this connection? While I waited, I kept watching my cameras. That was how I found the second clip. It came from the barn camera, angled toward the east pasture. The video was grainier than the trail cam, but the audio was better. At 5:21 a.m., one of the contractors said, "Board lady said the ranch guy already knows." The other one laughed and said, "Then why are we doing it before sunrise?" That became Exhibit B. When the county clerk finally emailed the development file, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me and opened every PDF one by one. Plat map, road dedication, drainage plan, landscape plan, municipal water improvement correspondence, temporary construction access request. Then I saw the note. It was small, typed near the bottom of an old review sheet from before Silver Ridge had even broken ground. No water easement granted across Parcel 17. Parcel 17 was my ranch. I read the line again. Then again. For almost a year, Marlene had acted like the HOA's authority was inevitable, like their subdivision had expanded reality itself, and my ranch was just an inconvenience waiting to be corrected. But the county file said the opposite. The developer had asked. The answer had been no, and someone at Silver Ridge had gone ahead anyway. The line in the county file was only 7 words. No water easement granted across Parcel 17. But those 7 words changed everything. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen while the old ceiling fan clicked above me and the pump house sat quiet outside for the first time in days. The sentence was buried near the bottom of a development review sheet, the kind of document most people would scroll past because it looked boring. There were permit numbers, drainage notes, road improvement comments, and utility requirements. Then that line. Parcel 17 was my ranch. Not beside my ranch. Not near my ranch. Not some vague surrounding area the HOA could reinterpret later. My ranch. The developer had asked the county about using a route across that parcel for water access before Silver Ridge Estates was built, and the file made the answer painfully clear. No easement had been granted. No water rights had been recorded. No private well access had been approved. Marlene's entire argument was not just weak. It was backwards. The developer had been told no, and somehow, years later, the HOA was acting like no had magically turned into yes. I forwarded the file to Daniel Reeves, my attorney, and he called me 12 minutes later. He did not even say hello properly. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked. "I think it means they had no easement. It means they were on notice that there was no easement before the community was completed. If the developer file was transferred to the HOA at turnover, then somebody either ignored this or chose not to look." I asked him what came next. He said, "Now we stop asking politely." The demand letter went out the following Monday by email and certified mail. Daniel wrote it in the kind of calm legal language that feels more dangerous than shouting. It identified my ranch by parcel number, cited the recorded deed, referenced the well permit, attached the surveyor's preliminary findings, and included still images from the trail camera showing the contractor entering my property before sunrise. Then it listed what the HOA had to do: cease all use of my private well and water line, remove the unauthorized connection, preserve all emails, invoices, meeting minutes, text messages, work orders, and communications related to the water line, provide the name of every contractor involved, disclose every board vote or informal approval connected to the installation, reimburse me for excess pump electricity, inspection costs, surveyor fees, plumber fees, and any damage to the well system or property. The letter also warned them not to enter my land again without written permission. I expected anger. I expected denial. I did not expect Marlene to double down so hard that she damaged her own board. That evening, the HOA sent a notice for an emergency community meeting. The subject line said, "Water interruption caused by adjacent ranch owner. Not unauthorized connection. Not property dispute, not pending county review. Water interruption caused by me." By then, I knew better than to argue in comment sections or neighborhood email chains. I printed everything instead: the deed, the well permit, the county line, no water easement granted across parcel 17, Ellen's survey letter, Marlene's email saying the association had full knowledge of the connection's location, photos of the valve box, still frames from the trail camera, and Daniel's demand letter. Then I went to the meeting. Silver Ridge held it in their clubhouse, a building that looked expensive from the outside and cheap up close. Fake stone columns, plastic plants, bright lights, folding chairs, and a long table where Marlene sat in the middle like a judge. Grant Keller sat beside her. The treasurer, a nervous man named Paul, kept flipping through a binder without reading anything. The room was full. People turned when I walked in. Some looked angry. Some looked curious. Some looked like they had already decided I was the villain, because that was easier than wondering what their HOA dues had paid for. Marlene opened the meeting with a speech. She said the board had been working tirelessly to maintain community standards. She said the ranch owner next door had refused reasonable cooperation. She said the water issue was part of a broader pattern of hostility towards Silver Ridge Estates. I sat in the back and listened. Then she said the HOA had always understood the ranch water connection to be part of developer-established infrastructure. That was when I raised my hand. Marlene tried to ignore me. A resident turned around and said, "Let him speak." Then another person said, "Yeah, if this is about him, he should speak." Marlene's smile tightened. "You may make a brief comment," she said, "but this is a homeowners meeting." I stood up with my folder. "I'm not a homeowner in your association," I said. "That is exactly the point." The room got quiet. I did not give a speech. I did not tell them Marlene was a liar. I did not accuse every resident in that room of stealing from me. I simply read from the county file. No water easement granted across parcel 17. Then I held up the page. "This is parcel 17, I said. "My ranch." Someone near the front asked, "What does that mean?" "It means your HOA has no recorded right to use my well." Marlene interrupted. "That is your interpretation." "No," I said. "That is the county's development record." Paul, the treasurer, finally looked up from his binder. I saw his face change. Not dramatically, just enough. The color went out of him, in a slow, private way. He knew something, or he had just realized something he should have known earlier. Grant leaned toward Marlene and whispered, but the room was too quiet for whispers to disappear. "Do we have the recorded document?" Marlene snapped. "We have developer correspondence." A woman in the second row said, "That's not what he asked." Then I showed them the photos. The valve box on my land, the fresh pipe, the trench, the trail camera stills, 2 men climbing my fence, a white contractor truck parked without headlights near sunrise. The room changed after that. Anger did not vanish. It turned direction. People started asking Marlene questions she did not want to answer. Who approved the work? Was there a permit? Why was the contractor on private land? Did the board vote? Was the water metered? Had the HOA been paying for the water? Marlene kept saying the same thing in different words. The board acted in good faith. The developer had represented access. The community relied on the connection. The ranch owner had chosen an aggressive response. Then Paul opened his binder. At first, I thought he was looking for something to help her. He was not. He pulled out a printed invoice and stared at it like it had become poisonous. "What is that?" a resident asked. Paul swallowed. "It's from Desert Flow Site Services," he said. "For landscaping water access improvements." Marlene turned sharply. Paul. But he had already started reading. "Install tie-in to existing ranch water source, per HOA board instruction." For a moment, no one moved. That invoice did what my words could not. It stripped away every vague phrase Marlene had used. Shared infrastructure. Developer established access. Community reliance. Temporary arrangement. The contractor's own invoice said ranch water source. Per HOA board instruction. A man in the back stood up. "Are you telling us our HOA paid a contractor to connect to his private well?" Marlene said. "That is an oversimplification." He answered. "It sounds like a felony with landscaping." That was not legally precise, but emotionally, it landed. The room erupted. Marlene banged her pen on the table and demanded order. Grant started saying the board needed time to review. Paul closed the binder like he wanted to disappear inside it. Residents who had glared at me when I walked in were now asking whether their dues were going to cover a lawsuit. I stayed standing just long enough to say one more thing. My attorney has asked the HOA to preserve all records. The county has the file. The sheriff has the 911 report. Code enforcement has the photos. Nobody needs to take my word for anything. Then I walked out. I did not slam the door. I did not argue in the parking lot. I drove home under a dark orange sky, past the dead fountain, past the entrance flowers already curling at the edges, and back through my gate. The next morning, a county inspector called. His name was Howard Bell. He had the voice of a man who had spent 25 years listening to people explain why their unpermitted work was somehow not their fault. He asked if he could inspect the connection. I said yes. He asked if the line had any approved backflow prevention between the HOA irrigation system and my private well. I said not that I could see. He got quiet. Then he asked me to send the contractor invoice again. 2 hours later, he called back. "This is no longer just a neighbor dispute," he said. I looked out the kitchen window toward the well house. For almost a year, Marlene had treated my property line like a suggestion, my well like a convenience, and my patience like weakness. Now the county was using different words. Unauthorized utility connection, possible contamination risk, trespass, unpermitted excavation. And for the first time since I found that wet line in the dirt, I felt the weight shift. Not because I had more power than the HOA, because the paper finally did. When Howard Bell came out to the ranch, he did not arrive alone. That was the first sign that the county was taking it seriously. His white county truck came through my gate just after 9 in the morning, followed by a code enforcement vehicle and a sheriff's cruiser. Howard stepped out wearing a faded cap, steel-toe boots, and an expression that made it clear he had already decided the truth would be found in the ground, not in anyone's opinion. Marlene arrived 5 minutes later. Of course she did. She pulled up on the Silver Ridge side of the fence with Grant beside her, and Paul the treasurer sitting in the back seat, like a man being driven to his own sentencing. Marlene had traded her sunglasses for a folder thick enough to suggest authority, and thin enough to worry me for her. Howard did not ask her for a speech. He asked for the recorded easement. Marlene started with her usual language. Developer established access, community reliance, transitional infrastructure, good faith board action. Words that sounded polished in a clubhouse and useless beside an open trench. Howard waited until she finished. Then he said, "Ma'am, I need the recorded easement." She opened her folder and handed him the same photocopy she had given the deputy. He looked at it for maybe 10 seconds. "This is not recorded," he said. Grant cleared his throat. The developer represented. Howard cut him off without raising his voice. "I am not asking what the developer represented. I am asking what was recorded against this parcel." Nobody answered. That silence did more damage than an argument. The sheriff's deputy, the same one from the 911 call, stood near the gate with his notebook. He looked calmer this time, but sharper too. He already knew nobody was getting arrested because I closed my own valve. Now he was there to document who had crossed a fence, who had dug a trench, and who had connected pipe to a private well without permission. Howard walked the line with Ellen's survey flags already marking the boundary in bright orange. He crouched at the valve box, took photos, measured the distance from the property line, and followed the disturbed soil back toward my well trench. The code enforcement officer, a woman named Reeves, checked the fittings and asked Luis a few questions about the system. Luis pointed with a screwdriver, never touching the pipe. That tie-in is new. No meter, no proper separation that I can see. And if their irrigation system lost pressure and pulled back, you could have contamination risk into a private well system. That word changed the air. Contamination. Marlene immediately said, "There has been no contamination." Howard turned to her. "That is not the same as saying the connection was permitted or protected." Then he looked at me. "Have you used the well since discovering this?" "Only after isolating that branch," I said. "The valve to the east line has stayed closed." He nodded and wrote that down. The code enforcement officer asked Marlene for the permit number for the water connection. Marlene looked at Grant. Grant looked at Paul. Paul looked at the ground. No permit number appeared. The inspection took almost 2 hours. They photographed the valve box, the trench, the fence, the well house, the manifold, and the place where the pipe disappeared towards Silver Ridge. They compared my deed to Ellen's survey flags. They reviewed the well permit. They checked the county development note again. No water easement granted across parcel 17. Marlene tried one last time to turn the situation emotional. "Our residents were without landscaping water because of his actions," she said, pointing at me. "We had homeowners terrified that fire protection had been compromised." Howard looked toward the silent Silver Ridge fountain, then back at my fire tank. "Was the HOA using this private well for certified fire protection?" he asked. Marlene hesitated. Grant answered too quickly. "It was part of emergency readiness." Howard's face hardened. "Do you have approved plans showing a private ranch well as part of your fire protection system?" Nobody moved. That was the moment I saw Paul close his eyes. Because now the HOA had two bad choices. Either the water was only for landscaping, which meant Marlene had exaggerated a public safety emergency to 911, or they had actually represented an unauthorized private well connection as part of emergency infrastructure, which was much worse. Howard closed his notebook. "Until further notice," he said, "the association is not to reconnect to this line, open this valve, enter this property, or perform any work related to this connection without county approval and written permission from the property owner." Marlene's voice sharpened. "You can't leave our community without water." Howard looked tired. "Your community has municipal water service. What you do not have is permission to use his well." That sentence landed like a gate slamming shut. A notice of violation came 3 days later. It listed unpermitted excavation, unauthorized utility connection, lack of approved backflow protection, work performed outside the recorded development boundary, and failure to produce a recorded easement. It ordered the HOA to submit a removal and restoration plan, hire a licensed contractor approved by the county, disconnect the illegal line under inspection, restore my soil, and provide documentation of all work performed. The sheriff's report was updated too. The trail camera footage showed the contractor crossing my fence. The barn audio captured them joking about why they were doing it before sunrise. Daniel forwarded everything to the contractor licensing board and to the HOA's insurance carrier with a preservation demand. That was when Silver Ridge stopped sending me threats. They started sending messages through attorneys. Their tone changed immediately. Suddenly, they were reviewing historical development assumptions. Suddenly, they regretted any confusion. Suddenly, the board wanted to resolve the matter cooperatively. The same people who had called me hostile were now very interested in being neighborly. Daniel told me not to answer anything directly, so I didn't. Every email went through him. Every request for access required written notice, county presence, and proof of insurance. Every proposed repair had to include a plan, a licensed contractor, and confirmation that no HOA worker would enter my land unsupervised. Marlene hated that. I knew, because she tried to bypass it. One Saturday morning, she walked up to my gate with 2 residents and a printed letter demanding that I allow emergency access to inspect the line. I did not open the gate. I did not argue. I held up my phone and told her all access requests had to go through council and the county. She said, "You are enjoying this." I said, "No, Marlene, I am documenting it." She left. The public meeting happened the following Thursday. By then, the notice of violation had spread through Silver Ridge like smoke. Residents who had once yelled at me from the road were now reading county language, not Marlene's. Unauthorized connection, no recorded easement, permit violation, possible liability exposure. The clubhouse was packed. This time, I did not sit in the back. I sat beside Daniel, close enough to hear every whisper at the board table. Howard Bell attended as a county representative. The sheriff's deputy stood near the wall. The HOA's insurance adjuster sat 2 rows behind Marlene, taking notes with a face that never changed. Marlene opened by saying the board had acted in good faith based on information inherited from the developer. A resident stood up before she could finish. Then why did the contractor invoice say per HOA board instruction? Another resident asked why there was no permit. Another asked why the board had called 911 instead of checking the property records. Then an older man near the front held up his assessment statement and asked the question that broke the room open. Are our dues paying for your mistake or your cover-up? Marlene went pale with anger. Grant tried to say the board was limited in what it could discuss due to pending legal matters. That might have worked if Paul had not finally opened his binder again. His voice shook, but he spoke clearly. There was no recorded easement in the turnover packet, he said. The room went silent. Marlene turned toward him like he had betrayed her personally. Paul kept going. The developer correspondence was incomplete. The county file was not reviewed before the work order was approved. I raised concerns about the lack of a meter and was told the president had handled access. For a few seconds, nobody breathed. Then everyone spoke at once. Marlene banged her hand on the table, demanding order, but the authority was gone. You could feel it leave her. It had not been taken by me. It had been taken by the documents, the inspection, the invoice, the county notice, and her own treasurer finally refusing to carry the lie any further. Howard stood and gave a brief statement. He did not dramatize anything. He did not accuse. He simply said the county had found no recorded easement granting Silver Ridge Estates the right to access my private well, that the connection lacked required approval, and that the HOA was under order to remove it under supervision. That was all he needed to say. The personal dispute Marlene had tried to create was gone. There was only the record. Daniel then stated that my side would pursue reimbursement for documented costs, restoration, excess utility usage, legal fees where available, and any confirmed damage to the well system. He also confirmed that all evidence had been preserved and that any further entry onto my property would be treated as trespass. I watched Marlene listening to him, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked small, not humble, just cornered. After the meeting, no one shouted at me in the parking lot. A few residents avoided my eyes. One woman, the same one who had yelled about her HOA dues, walked up and said quietly, "We didn't know." I believed her. That was the thing about the whole mess. Most of those people had not stolen water from me. They had not climbed my fence. They had not approved the pipe. They had trusted a board that used confident language to cover a very simple truth. Someone wanted my water. Someone knew they had no right to it. And someone thought I would be easier to intimidate than to ask. The illegal pipe came out on a Tuesday morning. Not at sunrise. Not quietly. Not with 2 men climbing my fence and hoping nobody would notice. It came out under county supervision, with Howard Bell standing beside the trench, a sheriff's deputy parked near my gate, a licensed contractor wearing a body camera for his own protection, and Marlene Price watching from the Silver Ridge side of the fence like every shovel of dirt was an insult written directly to her name. I stood near the barn with Daniel beside me. I did not touch anything. That was part of the agreement. The HOA had to remove the connection. The county had to inspect the removal. The contractor had to document the disconnection. My plumber had to check my system after they were done. Nobody from the HOA board was allowed onto my land without written approval, and Marlene was specifically told to stay outside the gate. She hated that part most of all. The new contractor exposed the line slowly. First the valve box came up, then the pressure regulator, then the section of PVC that had been tied into my ranch line. When the pipe finally separated from the soil, it looked smaller than I expected. That surprised me. Something that had caused weeks of stress, a 911 call, a county investigation, a packed HOA meeting, legal bills, and half the neighborhood turning on its own board, could be held in 2 hands. But that is how property violations usually are. They start small. A few inches past a boundary, a pipe under a fence, a gate opened without permission, a line in an email saying the board has already decided. By the time people realize what happened, the damage is no longer just dirt and plastic. It is trust, money, safety, and the simple feeling that your home is still yours. Howard inspected the capped line. Luis pressure tested my system. The contractor filled the trench properly this time, compacted the soil, and removed every piece of unauthorized material from my side of the fence. Silver Ridge had to pay for all of it. That was only the beginning. The settlement took another 6 weeks. The HOA reimbursed my surveyor fees, my plumber's inspection, documented excess electrical usage tied to the pump cycling, part of my attorney's fees, restoration costs, and the testing of my well system. They also paid the county's inspection and reinspection fees. Their insurance carrier covered part of the property damage claim, but not all of it, because unauthorized work approved by a board is not something insurance companies enjoy discovering after the fact. Desert Flow Site Services lost the HOA contract. Then they had to answer to the contractor licensing board. I do not know every detail of what happened there, but I do know they were required to explain why their workers crossed a fence before sunrise, dug on private land, and connected to a private water system without verifying easement rights or permits. A month later, their trucks disappeared from Silver Ridge entirely. Inside the HOA, things got uglier. Residents demanded records, not summaries, records, invoices, emails, minutes, messages, and turnover documents from the developer. Once those started coming out, Marlene's control over the story collapsed. The board had not voted cleanly. The county file had not been reviewed. The developer's vague letter had been treated like legal authority because it was convenient. Paul had raised concerns about the missing meter, and Marlene had pushed ahead anyway because she believed hesitation made the board look weak. At the next election, she was removed as president. She did not go gracefully. She gave a long speech about leadership, sacrifice, rural obstructionism, and how hard it was to protect property values when outsiders refused to cooperate. Nobody clapped, not even Grant. Paul resigned before the vote was finished. Grant lost his seat 2 weeks later in a special recall. The new board sent me a letter. This one was different from the others. No threats, no fake authority, no language about community standards or shared infrastructure. It acknowledged that my ranch was not part of Silver Ridge Estates, that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property, and that any future communication about boundary issues would go through legal counsel or the county. I framed that letter, not because it was beautiful, because it was proof that the same organization that once tried to fine me for my fence had finally admitted the fence was not theirs to judge. Life did not go back to normal immediately. People imagine a legal win feels like a movie ending, with music rising and the bad person walking away defeated forever. Real life is quieter and more annoying. I still had ruts near the fence. I still had to reseed part of the pasture. I still checked the pump at night for weeks, because every strange sound made me wonder if something else had been touched. But slowly, the ranch felt like mine again. The well ran normally. The east trough stayed full. The fire tank filled the way it should. The horses stopped waiting at dry metal. And Silver Ridge's fountain stayed off for a long time, until they finally connected their landscaping to a properly permitted, metered municipal line, like they should have done from the beginning. One afternoon, I put up a new sign near my front gate. It was small, black letters on white metal, private property, no HOA jurisdiction. A few residents from Silver Ridge still waved when they drove by. Some did not. That was fine. I did not need to be loved by a subdivision. I just needed them to stay on their side of the property line. Marlene never apologized. I did not expect her to. People like her rarely feel sorry for crossing a line. They feel sorry they met someone who could prove where the line was. And that was the real lesson. I did not win because I yelled louder. I did not win because I threatened anyone, damaged anything, or tried to get revenge in some dirty way. I won because I stayed calm when she wanted me angry. I recorded when she wanted me defensive. I kept the letters she thought would intimidate me. I pulled the deed, the survey, the well permit, the county records, the contractor invoice, and the video footage. I let the paper speak, until even the loudest person in the room had to sit there and listen. Property rights do not protect themselves. A fence does not matter if you never check it. A deed does not help if you never read it. And a private well can become someone else's shared infrastructure the moment you let arrogant people rename what they are taking. So if you ever find yourself dealing with an HOA, a neighbor, a contractor, or a developer who acts like your land is just an inconvenience to their plans, do not start with rage. Start with evidence. Take photos, save emails, read your deed, find your survey, call the county, ask for permits, make them show the recorded document they claim gives them power. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not opening the gate. Sometimes it is standing beside your own valve, on your own land, while the person who called 911 on you realizes the sheriff is not there to arrest you. he is there to look at the pipe. And if you have ever had someone try to push past your boundary, tell me what happened in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs the reminder. Save it in case you ever have to defend your own property. And subscribe if you want more stories where the loudest bully in the room learns that paperwork, cameras, and property lines can hit harder than any argument ever could.